All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for the Solar Photovoltaic Systems Recovery, Reuse, and Recycling Working Group. So if you all remember, this working group voted to postpone meeting until after the legislative session. So now that the session is done, we are I believe we have monthly meetings set up. Just to give some folks some updates, the MCCC has asked the working groups to focus on 3 different priorities. And then those priorities were discussed in one of the meetings, I forget which one, that the Climate Change Commission held. And then for this next legislative session, we are being limited to 4 recommendations to be submitted to the Maryland Climate Change Commission. So just some updates regarding priorities and recommendations for this working group. But first, I did want to start off with roll call, and then we do have some vacancies, so I think we need to talk about how we're going to get those seats filled. So let me just share my screen right here because we can combine both of these conversations. So is Senator Benjamin Brooks on?
This is Kim, his chief of staff. I'm on his behalf. He should be signing on shortly.
Okay, cool. Delegate Mike Rogers? We're working to get Rick Kessler to be MDE's appointee. I'll let Rick introduce himself.
Thanks, Bradley. Rick Kessler, I'm the Land and Materials Administration Director. Glad to be here.
All right. And then I heard Landon, how do you say your last name?
Farrig.
Farrig is going to be replacing Evie Schwartz for MEA. And then I put you in contact with our person who does the applications for working group advisory council seats and whatnot. Josh Kurtz, Secretary Josh Kurtz.
Yeah, this is Bob Sinski. I'll be the proxy for Secretary Kurtz.
Okay. David Chai.
Present.
And then I don't know if we've finished the application quite yet, but Brittany Baker with the Chesapeake Climate Action Network has either applied or will be applying for this seat. Is Brittany online? Okay. So here we have another vacancy. There was, and it was previously held by Pearl Donahue Valet with PHI. So we're going to need to refill this one. David Bugelmans. Is Stacy Ono on?
Yes, I'm here. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, you're all good. And then I seem to remember some conversation at the tail end of our meetings last year. There was some conversation, and Stacy, you're with BGE, correct?
That's correct.
And then I remember the conversation being around whether BGE had community solar whether this was the right spot. But I think we can have that conversation today. Scott Elias.
President, and yeah, Bradley, I think it was me who raised that. My concern was just since the utilities cannot own and operate the solar projects, that my suggestion was that Stacy take the utility seat and that we backfill the vacancy from Pearl with another voice from the industry so that we're more fully capturing the intent of the legislation in terms of the diversity of participants.
All right, and then we do have 2 vacancies, one for solar photovoltaic systems recovery, reuse, and recycling. I know I received some emails for some recommendations on this, on these last 2, and then someone who has some expertise in decommissioning energy related projects. So we're looking to get these seats filled. If you can send me names, we can reach out to them. We can get them applications. That would be great. We do have a new process for appointing people, and it varies depending on whether it's appointed by the secretary or by the governor. We have links for web forms so that you can fill out that application as well. I don't know if we're using the governor's appointment software anymore. I think it's been replaced by this web form process, but that's something that I will have to verify. So just going back to the community solar energy industry. Scott, can you just repeat your recommendation again?
Yeah, so it sounds like the openings that we need to have are all industry voices. If I understand correctly, I may be the only voice on the call, at least right now, that is the perspective of someone who owns and operates, and then ultimately is a responsible force for the decommissioning and potential recycling of these types of projects. So what I had sort of been suggesting was if Stacy is a utility perspective, instead of being a community solar perspective, that we replace, as we go to replace these openings, that we put someone else who is from a perspective of owning and operating community panels for community solar. And then similarly, it sounds like you're looking for someone who has experience decommissioning solar projects, as well as someone who has experience with solar recycling. So basically, I'm just trying to make sure that we have perspectives on this group from the individuals that are going to have the legal obligations to actually decommission and recycle these products.
Got it. So, and this is a recommendation at this point. Stacy would be replacing Pearls or David on here, because you said utility scale solar.
I did not. Is David not present at the meeting, or is he like resigned his post?
I haven't heard anything about David resigning. But I just heard you say utility solar, and then Stacy, I do want to.
So my point was, because we're a restructured state, like Stacy, correct me if I'm wrong. Your utility does not own and operate any community solar projects or solar projects within the state of Maryland, right? Like, you do not own actual PV modules, right?
We do not currently own community solar in Maryland.
So I guess, Bradley, like, my point, I don't actually really care exactly how they're rejiggered. My point was, if the intent is to have one utility rep, I think it makes sense to have one utility rep, and to fill the other sort of seats with people that have the experiences that are outlined in the statute of the perspectives that are supposed to be on this commission. I think it was an error initially to have two utility representatives with one utility representative being a community solar voice. And what I'm really just trying to do is making sure that we have people that have the expertise and legal responsibilities associated with what we're actually talking about so that those people are in the room as opposed to having decisions made for them.
Yeah, that's how I remember the conversation going right before we, I believe it was December time frame, or not. So,
And I'm happy if it's helpful to move me to be the community solar rep and instead replace me with someone from the resi industry, because we previously spoke about how there was no residential solar perspective either. I think I am currently the DG rep. Community solar obviously is a subset of DG, but if that makes it easier, I'm happy to switch to be the community solar rep and then replace the DG rep with a residential perspective.
yeah, and I know we had a lot of conversation in last year saying that we didn't have a lot of perspective from the residential side, and in terms of having the expertise and resources for decommissioning solar panels, it's more on the residential side because there's a pretty robust program through Bob at DNR on the utility scale solar in terms of decommissioning. So yeah, and this might be a much longer conversation as well. And I think I need to talk with my leadership about that, but we definitely want to make sure that that whoever is on the has a seat in the working group is representing that that category or chair, or well, they actually do represent whatever that category is. So any questions, comments, concerns on that?
Yeah, this is Bob. So
Yes.
just for clarification, David Bugelmans is an attorney with a firm out of Baltimore that handles many of the solar utility scale solar cases that we deal with. Just to let you know, I did email him and asked if he was able to join. We communicate often on other things. So, but just so it's clear that he's not, I noticed the category he's in. And again, you all need to decide the appropriate person for that. Like I said, David has a vast knowledge of solar projects, but like I said, he is not really an industry person.
Yeah, I don't think that I view that somewhat differently because he advises the industry. So I know that while I may have some qualms with the idea of a utility representative supporting to be a community solar industry, I don't have the same qualms with a lawyer that specializes in this and directly represents multiple companies. So I don't have an issue with that.
All right. So again, if folks can send me recommendations for some of these vacancies, we can make sure that we reach out to them and get them the application. So, all right.
Quick question: do you have names yet for the solar recycling? Like I know we brought to our group, Solar Cycle, and there's obviously others. But
Yeah.
before we sort of find others, can you potentially share who you have under consideration, or would you rather us just kind of give you names of who we think could be good fits?
I do have some emails on this, and I was looking at them beforehand, but one of the emails, I think the person is no longer there, and I think the guy from Solar Cycle, I'm getting a bounce back on his email too. So we just may have to find new or different people, and I can before our next meeting or after this meeting, I can make sure that I send out the names for the folks who are being considered. Although it's not I should note it's not the working group that actually appoints the person to this seat. It's either the top ones, I believe it's the secretary, and then these bottom ones, it's the governor. That does that, and we do have an application for that. But we're happy to take recommendations and for these seats as well. So I know PSC and MEA are on line. Did you have any feedback or on this discussion?
Nothing from MEA.
Nothing from MEA. David, any thoughts?
Were you asking MEA or you're asking me?
I was asking both.
Oh, yeah, no additional thoughts. I mean, as for the utility representative, I would just ask the trade associations.
And this is David from MEA, and Landon speaks for us.
All right, thank you. Okay, all right. The next item on our agenda was discuss the priorities for 2025. So as we discussed in these next two bullet points in the agenda, review draft recommendations, they're kind of related to each other. So for the priorities, they're really revolved around these recommendations, which I did attach to this meeting if you want to download those for yourselves. If you recall, we did vote on, I think it was something like 11 or 12 recommendations before we I guess adjourned for last year and before the legislative session. So these are the ones that did get enough votes. We are going to have to pare these down to 4 recommendations because unfortunately we weren't able to provide these recommendations in time to be reviewed by the Maryland Climate Change Commission, but we did include them as an addendum to the solar recycling and reuse report that the University of Maryland and Johns Hopkins helped put together. So I'm just going to read through these and then we can have discussion on how we want to refine these and maybe add some additional clarifications to these. And I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, we have to provide these 4 recommendations to the Climate Change Commission by, I believe it was August timeframe, but I can make sure that I get a date certain for that. Any questions on that? All right. Okay, so the first one, recommendation, and I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. The General Assembly should consider implementing incentives to bring a solar panel recycler to Maryland or work with surrounding states to establish a regional solar recycler. So I know David Comas has presented on some master's reports that are working with in MEA on this question specifically. I've heard some rumblings that there may be a solar recycler established in either Georgia and or Pennsylvania. I think those were the 2 states So I guess the question is, what would be needed to bring a solar recycler to Maryland or surrounding states so that you don't have to transport solar panels as far? I think the closest solar panel recycler right now, or at least based on our previous conversations, is in Ohio, which is it's not too far, but there's definitely a cost to transporting these. Any comments on that? All right. Hearing none, moving on to the next recommendation. So the General Assembly should consider the development of a stewardship organization, typically a nonprofit, to help manage the end-of-life collection of residential solar panels. And again, this recommendation was specific to residential solar panels because there was already a system in place for systems where that are larger than, I believe it's 2 megawatts and above, for decommissioning plans and bonding requirements for those systems. There's really a need for the residential side. And I should note, we actually just received a question from one of the landfills asking if they're starting to get more inquiries on whether they can dispose of solar panels and in their landfills, and whether it's household hazardous waste or solid waste. That kind of the answer to that question depends on how these panels are designated. But if they're household hazardous waste, there's not much restrictions on the state level for those landfills being able to accept those. And that's where the need is right now. And we just want to make sure that we are preserving our landfills. Just some context. We report out on our landfill capacity every year in our waste diversion and recycling report. So currently we have about 22 years of constructed landfill capacity. We have something like, I want to say 34 years of permitted landfill capacity, but it's not constructed yet. And that landfill capacity really only benefits that additional landfill capacity really only benefits the DC area. So there's definitely a need for to preserve our landfills, and we're starting to get questions from the landfills on whether they can accept solar panels or not. Rick.
You guys have probably discussed this before, but I assume you know EPA has been talking about including solar panels under its universal waste rule. I don't know if that, with this administration, that's going to move forward, but that was the discussion in the last administration.
Yes, we did talk about that, but that would only be if they are, that would not apply to household hazardous waste, correct? Because household hazardous waste is not hazardous waste. It would just be if like a company was designating those panels as a hazardous waste.
Basically, most of the solar panels don't contain significant amounts of materials that would qualify them to be hazardous waste. So the thinking was just like compact fluorescent light bulbs, they could end up in a landfill. But again, I don't know if that's still moving forward. It was something that had been requested by most of the industry.
Yeah, I know we briefly discussed it. And
Is Bob Nichols on? Because he can speak to that. There was a debate actually amongst the industry of whether that was a supported position or not. The Solar Energy Industries Association actually opposed that, whereas the American Clean Power Association supported it. But I see Bob's on this call.
Well, it's ACP, EEI, a bunch of the trades supported it.
Yeah, I am here, Scott. I'll just mention that, Rick, to your point, that appears to be somewhat in limbo right now. The discussions have lost momentum. I think the next round of discussions aren't really scheduled to happen until later this summer.
Thanks.
all right, David.
Not so much to the landfill issue, but to the stewardship issue. I just wanted to let the group know that there is a capstone, a UMGC capstone group looking at the issue of residential collection, sorting, and funding for recycling. They will be reporting out on Tuesday and Thursday of next week. I will send invitations to the chair, and you can put it out to the group if you wish. One's on Tuesday at 12 to 1, and the other one is on Thursday at 4 to 5. Also, as a result of our last discussions, there was a Australian paper that implied that solar panels are being recycled at less than a 25 or 20 year time frame. And I asked another group to take a look at how would we take a look at those issues within the Mid-Atlantic region. And so that report is going to report out on Wednesday from 1:30 to 2:30. Obviously, anybody on this working group is encouraged or authorized to join in and listen in. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited for those, especially with the focus on residential, because that's where a lot of our conversation was last year. And just some updates, and we did talk a little bit about this. I believe it was Washington had a EPR program, extended producer responsibility, but there was some, they are now, I think, revising that or have stopped the implementation of that. And this was happening right around, I believe it was November, December timeframe, right when we were adjourning for the year. Does anybody know any updates of what's happening in Washington? Robert?
Yes, so the Washington State program, which originally was supposed to be promulgated in 2019, has now been pushed back to 2028 for apparently a number of reasons, one being very little participation. So now it's looking like 2028 at the earliest.
All right. Okay. Any other conversation on this recommendation right here?
Bradley, just a question.
Yeah.
So I know these are our recommendations, and I know so the question is what are your thoughts, or anyone on the call's thoughts in terms of maybe taking these recommendations and perhaps creating legislation towards possible implementation, or is it probably better at this point just to kind of keep it at the recommendation stage?
So what we've been asked by the Maryland Climate Change Commission to do is to provide 4 recommendations. We have 5 here, so we might have to take one off or combine recommendations. And then just how I've seen those meetings work is the Climate Change Commission will take those recommendations. They might reword them based off of conversation, and then or they wouldn't necessarily consider them. And then I believe it's the Climate Change Commission, which then would make those recommendations to the General Assembly. At least that's my impression, just watching these meetings on how
Okay.
that works. So,
Fair enough. Fair enough.
so, and again, they received a whole bunch of recommendations from the 8 different working groups. So there's a lot in this past year. There was a lot of additional meetings that were scheduled because of just the volume of recommendations that were coming in. So that's why we've been asked to limit those to 4 recommendations. And then another guidance from the Climate Change Commission. It's not a requirement, but if there are costs that could be attributed to the recommendations, then you should consider those, but it's not a requirement. In the last meeting, our secretary made a comment that she didn't necessarily want to preclude a recommendation if it didn't have cost information, but it's definitely something that the working groups are being asked to look at. So, for example, if we go back to this recommendation right here, and incentives don't all have to be cost related, but if there was an incentive that was cost related, what would that look like? And then again, for standing up a stewardship organization, and then one of these, we had an advanced recovery fee, which is related to the stewardship organization. How much would the fee be? How much would, if the fee was set in place, how much revenue would be coming in? Would that be enough to manage the end of life solar collection and processing as well? Because transporters aren't going to take these for free, and the solar recyclers aren't going to take them for free either. So there's going to be costs that are associated with that. So those are just some other items that are coming out of the Maryland Climate Change Commission meetings.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, the next one, the Maryland General Assembly should consider establishing incentives to promote reuse, repair, refurbishment, and recertification or donation of solar panels before recycling is considered. And then just based off the conversation from last year, and to remind some folks, when you're looking at reduce, reuse, recycle, well, we don't want to reduce the use of solar, but you should generally reuse before you recycle if appropriate. I know there was definitely some conversation around what are the solar panels still going to be up to code. There were some complications with that, but I just wanted to open up or let people comment on this, just kind of remind folks on what some of the implications might be with this. Does anybody want to weigh in? David?
I think this is probably one of the key issues, is the question of recertification. I'm really hoping that that Robert can go talk to the work that SIA is doing to consider this. If we can get solar panels recertified for reuse on the grid, it really opens up a lot of opportunity. But this incentives would be to essentially develop centers that would allow for these recertification, because once you're at that center, it determines whether whether a refurbishment is appropriate, whether a repair is appropriate, and that's an easy way to go determine whether repair would be cost effective or not, or whether to go send it to recycling. And that's really the intermediate point on the way from the field to the recycler, is this screening area, and that's where the incentive should be. Robert, can you talk to that?
Well, yes, David, thank you. Certainly, that's an extensive conversation to have. You know, there are when we're talking about recovery and refurbishment repair, there are so many different scenarios. Not only scenarios for how the equipment comes in for that sort of initial triage, to what scenarios that equipment can be used in, and you know, your point about recertification, I'm assuming you're talking about like UL type of recertification. That's just one area that SEIA is looking into right now. So a lot more research, a lot more conversations need to happen before we can develop those channels. Currently, reuse of working panels is typically done in off-grid applications or in international installations. You know, using panels for more than just replacement panels for damaged utility scale project panels, that's a little bit trickier and can affect things like interconnect. You know, there's some technical barriers. So again, that's a extensive conversation to have, and probably would take up all of 2 hours of this meeting. But certainly here at SEIA, we're more than happy to answer specific questions if the group wants to put together a list of questions on the refurbishment side, and we're happy to address those questions.
Yeah, I think, and we have meetings going all the way up until October, monthly meetings. So we can certainly dedicate a meeting for that, because this is definitely an important topic. And don't necessarily want to have a political conversation, but with China halting the exports of rare earth minerals, does that come into play with first of all, are those rare earth metals, where, because I think it was a limited amount, are those used in solar panels? And if they are, does that create a higher level of urgency for recycling, reuse, repair, refurbishment, and all that stuff?
Yes, it may. I mean, obviously these are pretty dynamic times, so we're going to see how this plays out. But I can also point out that the growing capacity for recycling solar panels right now in the U.S., it is growing at a substantial rate. So, you know, you mentioned that the nearest recycling capacity in Maryland is Ohio. You know, there are fantastic recyclers now in Tennessee, in North Carolina. So because I work directly with most of the recyclers, including European recyclers who are looking to come to the U.S., I can say that capacity is growing almost exponentially. And that's one reason why they've recognized that we may need to improve our supply channels here in the U.S.
Yeah, I wonder if it'd be beneficial to maybe point out where those sites are on our website as well, or have linked, and maybe someone's already done it. But we can definitely use our website as a tool to connect people with resources. I know the EPA has an excellent website on solar panel recycling as well. So those may be some other things that we can do to help provide resources. If we don't necessarily have the financial support, we can definitely provide informational support.
Well, I can say that SEIA, the Solar Energy Industry Association, we're preparing to launch solarrecycle.org which will be a true one-stop for all things solar panel recycling, ranging from specific state policy to recyclers to equipment manufacturers. Pretty much all the data you could hope to find on PV recycling, we will have in solarrecycle.org. We're still a couple of months away. We're finishing up some details now, but just getting back to the refurbishment discussion, I think it would be worth having. There are some companies in the U.S. now that specialize in refurbishment and resale. It would be worth having a meeting and getting their input on what would be the most efficient approach for the state of Maryland to ensure that panels that have reuse and refurbishment value do in fact get recovered.
Would you be able to send me a contact so that we can reach out? We're also going to be looking for. We had a whole bunch of presenters last year, and although the focus this year is on recommendations, that doesn't mean that we can't have presenters. So that sounds like it would be beneficial for this group.
Yep, I will circle back with you, Bradley, with some names.
All right. Any other discussion on this topic? All right. So the next one was the General Assembly should consider incentives for workforce development / training to reduce breakage during decommissioning and transportation due to gaps in labor training or insufficient shipping practices. From what I remember around this conversation, it had to do with, well, sometimes solar panels will break when they're being transported. So they would have been able to be reused, but now you have to kind of repair them. So then there's additional costs that are associated with that. So if you could train or provide resources, or maybe even have a certification to be able to do that type of work, and a part of that would be ways to mitigate breakage, then maybe you would have more panels that could be reused and don't necessarily have to be repaired at that point. Any questions, comments on this recommendation? All right, David.
The Capstone Group found two aspects of this. One is in the use of the types of shipping containers. If you put them on pallets, you get one breakage rate. If you put them in what is actually a much more expensive shipping container, you get a much smaller breakage rate. I'm sure there's some economics that can be done on this. But the other issue that they were really aiming for with this discussion was that they thought that many of the panels were being broken as they were being decommissioned, meaning that they worked online, but as soon as they were taken off, they were roughly handled, or basically it was roughly handled, and hence by the time they made it to any type of shipping, they were broken. And so the thought was some type of training of the workers would actually give us more panels that could be reused, recertified, refurbished. That's what this was all about.
All right. Yeah, and thank you for the reminder, David. I know we did talk about that last year. All right. Any other questions, comments on this particular item? Okay. Moving on to the next one. So, would I should say, I think it was December last year, we did report out on these recommendations to the MCCC. This one got the most attention, I would say. So the General Assembly should consider an advanced recovery fee for residential solar to help pay for the stewardship organization's cost of collection and processing of solar owned by residents. So this wouldn't necessarily be a fee on commercial applications of solar, it'd be for residents. And really the feedback that we received from the commission was there were definitely some concerns around this recommendation. The question was how much the fee was going to be. Would it be adequate? Are there other ways to finance this so that the stewardship organization can cover their costs? And just going back, yeah. So I don't think that they asked us to change this. That it just needs to have more discussion. And then we did have these qualifiers that were added to this recommendation. The fee should take into account consumer affordability, the cost of recycling, and the Maryland's renewable energy goals. And the assumption is recycling costs will reduce in the future. And really the concern that that I heard was we don't want to disincentivize the expansion of solar, but as we're already seeing, we're getting questions on how to manage solar panels that are being currently decommissioned at a residential level. And because really solar has been expanding at an exponential rate, those decommissioned panels will start to increase at an exponential rate as well. So any questions on this one? David?
Just as a comment, if we're only allowed to go forward 4 comments onto the Climate Commission, I would think this one is easiest to fold into the one above that was also talking about stewardship.
Yeah, and we can definitely do that. I don't know if I haven't looked at the web form yet, but I'm sure there's going to be a word count on there. But yeah, that's definitely something, since they're related and similar at the same time, and they both talk about the stewardship organization as well. So I think that would be a good idea to do that. Any other questions or comments? I believe we heard from Scott or Robert last year that SEIA was supportive of an advanced recovery fee. Has there been any changes to that, or do you have any context that you would want to add?
No, just that we are still in support of advanced recovery fee for those residential panels.
And how do you how do you balance the need to expand solar as quickly as possible? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm not sure I understand the question, Bradley.
So the question, it was, if you're adding an additional fee at the point of sale, would that disincentivize folks from getting solar in the first place?
Yeah, we don't think so. We think it's a very modest fee, or should be considered when considering the fee, the total fee. It should be a modest number. The key is, what organization do you develop to manage that? And, but we think that the most effective way for these basically small volume quantities, the residential quantities, is with a small advanced recovery fee at purchase.
Yeah.
But we don't see that economically slowing the the development of residential solar. We just don't see that happening.
And do you know of any states that have implemented an advanced recovery fee?
No, but we do know that there are states like California and Minnesota that are considering it.
Okay, all right. And in Washington, since that was producer responsibility, that was a fee on the manufacturer, correct?
That's correct.
Or-
The Washington program would, right, the Washington program would have required manufacturers to develop the recycling infrastructure and provide the funding for collection and recycling of the panels.
I see. Okay. All right. Any other questions, comments on this recommendation, which might get folded into this one right here? I think if we are going to provide this as a recommendation to the Climate Change Commission, I think they would be interested in seeing like what the fee would actually be. And because that was a question. So what's the fee going to be? So, and how much would it cost and whatnot? So it may be something that we want to consider for this. Rick, you had a question?
Yeah, as someone new to this, I don't know all the numbers, but when we're talking about these fees and residential solar, how much, what someone I'm sure on the call knows this, what percentage of residential solar in Maryland is owned and what percentage is leased? And how would this fee affect those two models?
So we did, I don't necessarily know the numbers, but we did talk about, and I believe we put it in here, panels owned by residents. So it wouldn't be, it was very specific to not include the leased panels.
Why is that?
Because it would be, when they are decommissioned, it would be the responsibility of the business to dispose of those. And they typically have more resources and environmental teams to help them with the decommissioning. Whereas if you're a resident, don't necessarily have the expertise or knowledge or resources to do the decommissioning.
Got it. Thank you.
Does anybody know the split of owned versus leased in the state of Maryland? Or region?
That's okay. We can catch up later on that. If no one
Okay.
has it readily available. Thanks.
All right. Any other questions or comments on this recommendation right here? Okay. Well, I just wanted to do really a recap for this meeting. Didn't necessarily have anything else planned for this meeting, but I'd be interested, and we talked a little bit about it, potential topics for future meetings. I know at the end of the year last year, we talked about maybe getting someone in to do a presentation on residential solar decommissioning and some of the considerations for that, since many of our recommendations actually have to do with residential decommissioning. Are there any other thoughts on who would be a good person to give a presentation, or organization to give a presentation in one of these working group meetings? Or, oh, Robert.
Yeah, thanks, Bradley. I don't have a presentation recommendation at this point, but I would like to, at risk of sounding like a broken record, I have these conversations across many states. But if you're looking to incentivize or attract recycling capacity to a given region for solar panels, the critical component is glass. It's the recovery of glass. So when thinking about infrastructure additions or improvements, and trying to create a environment where recyclers will be attracted to come to a particular region, with the solar panels, the single greatest challenge with recycling solar panels is finding markets for glass, local markets for glass. So I would encourage you to think about that. Maybe get a presentation from companies that specialize in recycling glass. But from what I see across the nation, that's always the single largest challenge, is managing the glass as an output of the recycling process.
Yeah, I know. So is it the markets for glass, or the companies to do the processing to sell the markets?
Well, it's the markets that will receive the recovered glass. So, as we all know, as an example, companies that produce fiberglass insulation, they can use a glass, recycled recovered glass stream in their fiberglass production. That's just one example. But, working with every recycler, processor here in the US, I can tell you that their greatest challenge is having a local outlet for that glass, even if the glass has no return. If obviously, if you have to send 20 ton of recycled glass halfway across the country, the logistics costs alone are a tremendous barrier that will slow down capacity. So in these conversations, I always encourage people to think about what their regional glass markets look like and how they can improve markets for recyclers to send the solar panel glass.
Well, I know that in another advisory council that I facilitate, it's not necessarily solar panel recycling, but we do have someone on there who represents the Glass Packaging Institute and is very well aware of the various different markets that can accept glass. Now, I know we did talk about the glass and solar panels is specialty glass, where it's ultra pure, and if I remember, it doesn't have or it has reduced levels of iron in it. So I don't know if that limits the markets, but that might be an opportunity to have that individual come and talk about the various different glass markets.
Yeah, if you could connect me with that individual, I'd be happy to have a preliminary discussion with them, and maybe we can develop some talking points that would be helpful.
Yeah, he's definitely very focused on packaging, but he also knows the glass market. So yeah, I'll do that. I think David, you had a comment.
Quick question for Robert again. When you talk about recycling glass, even though it is specialty glass, you're not talking about recycling it back into specialty glass that the solar industry could use, right? You're talking about recycling it into any product that could use glass. Is that correct?
Yes, David, that's absolutely correct. Although recycling the glass back into solar panels, that really represents the best possible scenario. We know that panel glass production for solar panels is pretty limited here in the U.S. So we just want to find glass markets of all kinds that can use the recovered panel glass.
Let me ask this question. Are you aware of any companies out there that do recycle or that can recycle PV panel glass back into the specialty glass?
Back into glass to be used for PV panels?
Yes. And are you aware of anyone that does that?
Not in the U.S. right now.
How about overseas?
There are companies overseas that we are now doing some due diligence on.
Okay.
But of course, the challenge is that the fact that the glass has so little value that the cost to ship recovered or recycled cullet overseas would be extremely prohibitive.
No, the question I'm looking at is the process a specialty process? Is it something that maybe we should be considering bringing that part of the industry here? Although I imagine from what you were saying that its co-location with a recycling plant is probably the major consideration in order to get rid of the transportation costs.
Yeah, that is certainly one consideration of many. But there are companies in the U.S. right now that are looking at the potential for production of float glass for solar panel manufacturing. Whether or not they'll be successful in executing on that, I don't know. But certainly there are companies that are considering it.
Let me ask one final question. For the companies that are recycling solar panels right now, I know most of them grind the panels. Is that after they take the glass off? And my question is the EVA attached to the glass and acting as a contaminant, or are you normally able to get the glass free of the EVA as part of the recycling process?
Yeah, good question, David. In most cases, the recyclers we work with are actually separating the EVA from the glass and producing a clean glass stream.
Thank you.
And just some stuff that we've heard. We heard that there's potentially a market with abrasives. So typically, like if you're doing sandblasting or something like that, and if you're going to be stripping paint off or whatever, off of whatever you're stripping paint off, there might be an opportunity there. And the markets are actually pretty decent in terms of what they're willing to pay for that. So that's one that I just heard a couple months ago, and there's definitely going to be more out there.
That's true. There is a market for recycled glass in the abrasive grit industry.
All right. I think another potential topic, once SIA's website gets up and running, I think it would be definitely beneficial to kind of walk us through that. I know SIA gave a presentation last year on some resources, but that sounds like there would be some potential there.
Yeah, we'd be happy to do that, Bradley, when it's ready.
And you said a couple months, next week. When is that coming?
Yeah, we're still a month or two away from launch. So I would say I would expect in the June timeframe.
End of June? Okay. Cool. All right, just taking notes here. All right. David, I know you had mentioned your presentations next week. Can you just give us a reminder of when those presentations are? I know I received at least two of them. I got the Wednesday, Thursday one, but I think there was one on Tuesday, right?
Yes, and I just sent you an email with all three. On Tuesday, we're going to be taking a look at what is the lifetime of a solar panel in the Mid-Atlantic region, or at least as much as we can tell based on the process of the Australian paper. Then on Wednesday at 1:30 p.m., we're going to be taking a look at Delaware, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. And from my pre-look at that paper, it looks like there's not a lot of consideration of recycling in those areas, but not of residential recycling. And then on Thursday, we'll be looking at Maryland and Virginia, and that one's at 4 to 5.
Awesome. Well, if anyone's interested in going to those, if you can just let David and myself know, and I'm going to try and make them. The Wednesday one might be a little bit difficult for me, but I'll definitely have someone on my staff go to that one. And these are recorded, right, David?
Dr. Fu?
Yes, they all recorded, and I also put them into the chat. I think I put too much in the chat, so I had to put in May 1st separately. But those are the titles for the 29th, 30th, and the 1st. And they all in the same Zoom line.
Oh, okay. So it's just going to be one link then.
Well, it's
Yeah,
one
exactly.
Zoom line, because it's the UMGC EDU, it's the professor's line.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Makes it easier to use the same Zoom link for the students to always be able to come into the same classroom.
Got it. That makes sense. Cool. All right. Any other questions or comments? I don't think we're going to be taking the full 2 hours this time. Cool. Well, we can probably, before we get to the public comment, just to review, I am going to send out the names that we have already received for the, going back to the panel members right here. If you have any other names for people to be considered for one of these seats, that would be great. And we can make sure that we get them an application form to fill out for that. And Robert was going to send me some names for some potential refurbishment presentations or companies that are doing refurbishment. I was going to connect Robert with our glass contact. And then maybe in 2 months, we might have a presentation from SIA on their fancy new website for solar panel recycling and reuse resources. Did I miss anything in that conversation? Oh, and then if you want to go to the, I guess, David, we probably want to distribute the link because we do have a number of folks who aren't on the call as well. I can talk to David about that afterwards, but yeah, we just want to make sure that anyone who's on this meeting has an opportunity to join those presentations. Okay. Well, if there's nothing else, I'm going to move on to the public comment. Anyone want to give a public comment who's not a member of the working group? Hearing none, I think we can adjourn. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, Bradley.
Thanks, Bradley.